Well, hello everyone, and welcome to this Kendall Hunt webinar, Virtual Crime Scenes, the Future of CSI Education, presented by Susan Clutter, Leggie Boone, and David McGill. We're very excited to be presenting for you today. The field of CSI education, as I'm sure you know, is a very unique one. And because of that, it can pose some challenges for the educator looking to develop professionals who are field ready and are adequately prepared to do what they need to do. So how do we remedy this situation? Well, that's what we are going to be looking to answer today. So during the presentation, please feel free to throw any questions you have in the chat function or the Q&A function, and we'll address those at the end. But before we get started, I'd love to introduce our wonderful presenters. Susan Clutter, she received a master's degree in forensic science from George Washington University. She worked as a CSI for the Montgomery County and Baltimore City Police Departments in Maryland before she became a college professor in 2003. She's taught at various colleges in Maryland and the Virginia area, and she has taught forensic sciences courses for the Virginia Fire Marshal Academy and the State Department. Her specialty areas include crime scene investigation, blood pattern interpretation, and fire science. She's now an associate professor in forensic science program at the Youngstown State University. Dr. Leggie Boone is a forensic analyst for a sheriff's office in Florida. She's been involved in forensic sciences since 1993, including overlapping years as a crime scene investigator and educator in Baltimore, Maryland. When her daughter was born, she left the hectic schedule of being a forensic services supervisor, pharmacy assistant, and adjunct professor to teaching full-time. In 2008, she moved to Florida, where she returned to crime scenes and was recruited to become a forensic analyst with her current agency. She attained her PhD and Master of Philosophy and Public Policy and Administration in Criminal Justice with the goal of improving policies and curricula in collegiate forensic sciences and law enforcement agency crime scene investigation training. David McGill received his BA in the University of Maryland at College Park and his master's in forensic science at the George Washington University. He has over 2 decades of forensic examination experience with a specialization in footwear and tire track examination. He's a police training commission certified instructor, and he's published several research articles on crime scene investigation. So we're incredibly privileged to have all of you with us. I think it's such a unique combination to have people who are not only have worked professionally in the field for so long, but also have that unique take of also being an educator and knowing what is expected in the field for future CSIs, as well as how to get them there. So without further ado, I will turn it over to you guys. Thanks so much for being with us today.
Thank you. That was a great welcome. Thank you. And thanks to everybody who's on their lunch break or has the day off and is joining us today from places all around the country. Welcome. Again, like Megan said, I'm Susan Clutter, and the three of us had an idea to put together a book and to present some sort of a virtual component, crime scene component, in order to help us teach the next generation of crime scene investigators. And I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir here, but teachers have, come to understand that students don't learn critical and technical skills from reading a book or from hearing somebody lecture, no matter how good the lecture is or no matter how colorful the PowerPoint is. So teachers often turn to hands-on practical work. And in the case of a crime scene investigator, that means some sort of a mock crime scene setup. And again, I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir, but schools have so little space to share. There's very little lab space. We have larger and larger class sizes, particularly with forensic science, which is a very popular field these days. So we're prohibited to smaller rooms. The traditional lab with Bunsen burners and Erlenmeyer flasks and lab benches isn't really ideal for a crime scene setting. And then the onus is on the teacher or the instructor to buy supplies and props and upkeep the crime scene setting, cleaning it up. I know we've painted our crime scene condos several times because we can't get the blood off the walls. I mean, this is the kind of problem that not too many other lab folks have. We're sort of unique in that way. And moreover, we have a lot of faculty who might not have crime scene experience. They might have forensic experience, but not actual scene experience. And so it's troubling or hard for them to create realistic crime scenes. So that gave us the idea to create a virtual crime scene. Leggie's going to go ahead and narrate for you while I share my screen on what kind of a crime scene we came up with.
We talked about doing different types of scenes, what type of crime would be best for allowing our students to walk through, learn a little bit, apply what they've learned, and that would give us an opportunity to show multiple skills. We talked about a homicide scene, we talked about a burglary, and we considered the pros and cons and what those students might take away from these things. So we narrowed it down to a bank robbery where we could see an enclosed scene without the potential for the large field or the large road issues. And then the internal scene that would have multiple types of evidence that might include fingerprinting, might include some potential for DNA collection, and give us an opportunity to use the photography skills that the students are learning in the classroom. Our bank robbery would give our students also a chance to talk to different types of witnesses, talk to our first responders, and would also be something that nearly every town or county or jurisdiction would have an opportunity to experience at one time or another. So giving us the realistic sense of what the student might encounter. And Susan?
Sure. So you'll see here that we have a screenshot up. We're going to actually go into the program here in a few minutes, but we just wanted to show you what the student sees at the beginning, which is a chapter selection. And you'll notice that we've incorporated here a tutorial for controls. And that is designed twofold. One, to allow the student self-sufficiency in operating this virtual scene. And two, to provide them with extra equipment. So instead of just being a virtual character that moves around, we also have extra equipment, like we have a tablet where they keep notes and where they take photographs. We have a flashlight operation, all kinds of different little, a zoom feature. So this tutorial basically takes the onus off of the faculty member and allows the student to become self-sufficient. And they can refer to that tutorial at any time. Then we have a number of chapters. We chose 5 different chapters that are related to the book. So our chapter 1 is about securing the scene, the importance of securing the scene, and note-taking documentation, questioning witnesses and first responders. We'll give you a little sneak peek into that chapter here in just a minute. Chapter 2 is actually a methodical search. The student gets to choose how they want to search the crime scene. Then they can go ahead and actually perform that search. And in this case, they're going to be using the linkage theory to try to determine what evidence they should be looking for to find that evidence. Chapter 3 is using that tablet to control, to document the scene and also to take photos. And then they have a task where they have to actually label their photos by the type of photo. So the faculty can evaluate how the student tells that story. Have they taken establishing photos, overall photos, close-up photos? Have they used placards where needed? Have they used a ruler where needed? Chapter 4 is actually evidence packaging, where they are given choices on how they want to package their items of evidence. And again, that packaging, as we all know, that depends on what kind of processing they want to perform in the laboratory, or whether they want to actually do some processing on the scene. And so chapter 5 is the fingerprinting chapter. They have options to swab things for DNA. They can fingerprint using a variety of different methods. They can choose to process on the scene or in the laboratory. And there are a couple surprises to chapter 5. But chapter 5 actually finishes up with a video. So in other words, the bank comes up with their video of the scene in progress, which means at the end, the student can look over the video and see if they've missed anything. And that is a really important point to make for the students so that they get that needed feedback. And it's also very realistic. So Dave is going to go ahead and open up chapter 1 while I kind of narrate a little bit. Victory XR was the company that actually did the technical work for us. The student is prompted to put their name in, and this name is actually what shows up on the administrator or the faculty gradebook. Again, no matter what chapter they choose, they'll have the tutorial as an option that they can refer back to, but in this case, we're going to go to chapter 1. And just like real life, chapter 1 starts with the dispatcher giving the crime scene investigator a place to report. And right off the bat, the students, the onus is on the students to take notes in what they think they would need. So a faculty member could go ahead and assign for them later on in the semester, for example, a report that they have to fill out based upon their notes. So taking notes is critical, and we recommend that they don't take every note. So we've added a lot of superfluous information in here as well, but all of this is pretty critical. Upon entering every chapter, there will be a set of instructions, not too much, but a little bit of instructions for the student. And it also gives them the objective of the exercise. So in this case, they're documenting information and they're doing an initial walkthrough of the inside of the bank. Also, you'll notice on the bottom left-hand and right-hand sides of the screen, they have the control mechanisms, what they can do with their mouse. A left click is to select an object and a right click is to zoom in on that object. Then on the right-hand side, you'll notice that they have a flashlight option. They also have the gloves option to put gloves on. And then they have the tablet, which has the camera in it, and also the case folder in it, so they can refer to that at any time. Notice upon starting, Dave can move around. He can scan the bank. We've provided 4 different people for the student to talk to. And in this case, Dave has correctly chosen the first responder as the first person to talk to. And Dave is given an assortment of questions. And again, the student is not supposed to be asking every single question. In fact, they get points for finishing this within a certain time period, so that they're not dilly-dallying with the program. So again, Dave is talking to the first responder and taking some notes. We can use the first responder, just like real life. We can use the first responder to help us maintain the security of the scene by keeping an entry log. Or we can also ask Officer Jones to use her car to barricade the parking lot. Dave is going to go ahead and select something. Okay, Dave chose wrong. Thank you, Dave. Basically, whenever a student, in most of the chapters, whenever a student makes a choice that's not ideal, they're given immediate feedback. And in this case, there is a correct answer, which is that Officer Jones should be using the front door to secure the scene, because we don't have any evidence in the parking lot. We need an entry log. We also have, again, we're not going to have Dave go through all of the witnesses, but we also have, we have a police detective in the middle of the room here. We have a rather irate customer, just like in real life, over on the left-hand side. And although he's quite the curmudgeon, he also manages to reveal quite a bit of information. And so this is kind of an exercise in patience on interviewing people at the crime scene. And then on the far right, we have the bank teller, who is very shaken up, as per what you would imagine, and not as able to give out as much information because she's so shaken up. So again, we've tried to provide as realistic a set of folks that you would see at a typical bank scene as possible. And as Leggie mentioned, bank robberies are something that, whether you live in a busy city or whether you live in a very rural environment, if you have a bank in your jurisdiction, chances are a CSI is going to get a bank robbery. So when Dave is finished, or when the student is finished, they're going to go ahead and click out of the scene. And you'll notice that Dave received a very low score because he only spoke to one first responder and he didn't do an initial search of the scene. But this grading area, not only does it give the student their score and the time, but they get the option here to download that score. So if a faculty member wants to go ahead and use their own their own learning management system from the school that is provided to them, they can go ahead and they can have the student just hit the download button and that basically captures the screenshot, and that can either be emailed to the faculty member or it can be submitted on their learning management system as a file. And we will talk about this later, but the student has the option, if the faculty member wants, the student has the option to repeat the chapter as many times as they want. And so if the student, if the faculty member would rather have this be a situation where this is more practice versus practical, then they can have them, I'm using this semester and I'm actually having my students repeat it because they seem to be learning when they have to repeat things. So we're going to go into chapter 5 to just show you a little bit of the some of the forensic chapters. Chapter 5 is fingerprinting, and also the option for swabbing for DNA. So again, we have our objective, which is to identify items for fingerprint processing and to classify fingerprint patterns and to back fingerprint lift cards, which again is a very important part of the process. And here we are at the bank station, Dana, I just saw your question pop up. Absolutely. The can limit, and we'll talk about that when we get into the grade book. And so here is our deposit slip station. This happens to be where the bad guy comes in and writes out the holdup note. And you can see here that Dave has chosen, Dave, I'm sorry, I missed what you chose. I think it was the actual processing or the deposit slip counter.
It was processing the counter, correct?
Got it. Okay. So Dave has chosen to process that on scene, which obviously makes sense. We're not going to drag the whole counter back to the lab. And then he's given a number of options here for processing. And in several of these, please understand that there is more than one correct answer. So if the student picks a correct answer, regardless of which correct answer it is, when they go to hit confirm choices, they will see all of the potentially correct answers. And then they'll go ahead and, again, Dave's not going to do all this just for sake of time, but they can go ahead and when they get a lift, they can go ahead and add the information to the back of the lift for their file. And Dave's now going to go ahead and process the teller area. And again, he's picking a processing method here. And just as in real life, while he's processing the counter, he comes across a partial shoe print developed on the top of the counter because it appears that the bad guy has vaulted the counter. So he goes ahead and hits continue. And now we have a situation where the student has to go back to their photography and go back to their tablet and, place their L ruler and their placard, go ahead and photograph the shoe print using the camera. And using that camera option, they have a way to toggle the angle of the camera to make sure that, just like in real life, that the camera is at a 90-degree angle to the shoe print. So, Dave's pretty good at it, actually. The students have, every opportunity to take their time and get it right. And now we're going to go ahead and we're actually going to try to pull that shoe print up. And he's going to pick a gel lifter. And again, there are several ways that somebody might be able to pull that shoe print up. So the student has the option to pull it up with a gel lifter, and then they're going to go ahead and choose their lab examination request, which in this case is kind of obvious. It's a shoe examination. They also get to choose their packaging method. And this is just one item of evidence, but we actually have 9 items of evidence in total on this crime scene.
So at this point, rather than continuing to go through all the other items of evidence, we'll go ahead and close out this chapter to show you the conclusion of chapter 5.
Yeah, good idea. And again, just like in real life, I don't know how many former crime scene investigators we have in the room, but oftentimes when we do a bank robbery, we know that there's video, there's definitely digital information there. The problem is that it takes a little while to access because usually banks have outside security people to run the video. So frequently what happens is that the crime scene investigator gets there and has to do the work before the video can be seen. So we've essentially allowed the students to have access to video footage and they get to actually see that for example, that the suspect brings in the can of soda, puts it down when he writes the holdup note. He actually makes a mistake on one of his holdup notes, throws one in the trash can. We see him vault the counter. We also see him go out the back door. And so all of these are pieces of information that they may have gotten from the actual crime scene, but that they're now getting as a source of validation. And again, Dave got a pretty bad score because he only processed like 2 items. But that is the the gist of chapter 5. And we thought that we would go ahead and show you the grade center, because that's obviously pretty important to the faculty. When you purchase this component, this virtual crime scene, you have the option to, it gives you the instructor view, basically. And Dave, can you just scroll up for a quick minute? You'll notice that when you get in, you'll have an instructions tab, which happens to be where we are now. And it gives you a whole lot of information on how to essentially make this component work for you. So the student, or excuse me, the gradebook overview will show you all of your students, and that's going to be in the grid area. We'll talk about that here in a minute. But here is where we have instructions for how to use this the way you want. So for example, if you want to drop the lowest scores, so let's say that you want students to be able to do the chapter 3 times, and you want to take the best score of the 3. You can set that up via your gradebook. Or you could have it average all 3 scores. You can also set that up. So it gives you a lot of various methodologies depending on how you want to utilize this tool. Some faculty might want to utilize this as a test, for example, as an assessment, in which case they may only want the student to complete the chapters once. That's an option as well. But you'll see there's a lot of screenshot instructions, so it's pretty self-explanatory. And you'll see that it explains each tab. So you have a students tab where you can actually look at a specific student and what they've done. Or you can look at the component tab, which is what gives you, students obviously don't have access to this particular tab. But this allows you to choose how many retakes, whether the scores for the retakes are visible to the student, and what scores they get to see. The raw score, again, if this is a situation where, so for example, in the photography chapter, the students don't receive a score because we recognize that that's a situation where the faculty member is going to have to go in and look at the various photographs that have been taken by the student. And so that's a place where we would have to go in and override any raw score that's given. And so we have that option as well, so that faculty can go in and override a score, or provide a score in the case of the photography chapter. We also have an area for comments, which allows the faculty member to provide feedback to the student directly. The comments are somewhat limited, but it's a 400 character option, so that this prevents the faculty member from having to email every single student separately. They can go ahead and make individual comments that the students can see. And then the grid, Dave's going to go ahead and click on the grid. We've gone ahead and invented a couple of students here: Instructor Clutter, Student Clutter, Instructor Clutter 2, and Megan Peterman, who is the lady who gave us the introductions. She works for Kendall Hunt, and notice she hasn't actually completed anything yet. But we've got, Instructor Clutter has completed most of the chapters. And right now we have it set on the override feature, which means that the student, it's only recording the last grade that the student received on the chapter. But again, that can be changed based on what the faculty want. And Dave, I think that's a pretty good, oh, one last thing I did want to comment before, and Dave, you don't have to reshare the screen. This gradebook feature can be downloaded. It can be downloaded in a PDF. So if a faculty member wants a hard copy of it, and it can also be downloaded in an Excel program. So if for whatever reason, the faculty want to go ahead and do some, statistics crunching, they can go ahead and they can put this into an Excel spreadsheet and then do whatever they need to from there, from the Excel spreadsheet. I guess, Megan, before we take any questions, Leggie and Dave, is there anything I missed? Did I miss anything?
I don't think you missed anything, but I would add that not just faculty of academic institutions might be interested in using this. I've met several forensic club organizers who have students on varying levels, be they high school or college, or just groups of adults who are interested in forensics or working towards forensic education, formal education, that might apply the same virtual component to their practice, to their to the skills they're learning. And it kind of reinforces quite a bit, because a crime scene can be so different for every scene that you go to. Multiple banks will have different things to process. They won't be the same, exact same things that you'll see at every scene. Every burglary will be different, every homicide will be different, and so on. So hopefully this exposure will open a few minds as to some things you might do and you may not consider doing, or may not have thought of to do, whenever you get a chance to put your crime scene skills into practice.
Yep, and I would even add to that, Dave McGill and I both have taught police academy cadets. This is something that I could see, it certainly does not take the place of on-the-job training at all, but I could see this being used as a component in a police academy, where they're getting some practice without the instructors having to put together mock crime scenes for these academy cadets to use.
Or for that matter, even in preparation prior to putting together the crime scenes, to try to get some basics out of the way, particularly if you're dealing with a large group and you have limited staff available to manage that group.
Absolutely, absolutely.
We do have a couple of questions here in the comments. Dana would like to know, can faculty control whether students know how many evidentiary items are present, depending on the goal of the assignment?
Yeah, so that's a good question. Early on, we do not tell them. So the onus is on them to use what they know from questioning the witnesses. The curmudgeon guy knows a lot, actually. A little tip there. But and they're not given that information. And when I used it this first semester with my students, I had several students who actually missed an item of evidence. And part of the reason why they missed it is because they weren't paying a lot of attention to what the witnesses were saying. And in this case, I'm going to give you the answer. But there were 2 shots fired. And my students only found one, some of them only found 1 cartridge casing. And in this case, we got to use that linkage theory, and we've got to, understand that if 2 shots were fired, we need to look for 2 casings, and 2 bullet holes, and 2 bullets. And so that is where at the beginning, they are not given that feedback. However, the faculty member can choose to give that feedback after they complete the chapter, using either the comments or by talking about it in class. Later in the chapters. I think in that chapter we just went through, chapter 5, it actually tells the students, actually it might even be chapter 4, I'm trying to remember, but I believe it's in I think it starts in chapter 4 where they package. It actually tells the students that there are 9 items that they need to package. And, God help them if by chapter 4, they don't know what those items are. But again, this is where the feedback comes, they're given a clue, hey, there's 9 items here. And this is where that feedback from the instructor can be as little or as much as the instructor wants.
Excellent. We have another question here as well. Scott would like to know, are there plans to add additional crime scenes?
I think that'll depend on our feedback from those who put this into practice and how much we need to incorporate with current times, for instance, COVID factor, or the types of crime scenes that we might be able to work with a virtual reality agency, a company that we can show them and make them understand how to put these things into practice. That's a step that we had to take a lot of time to do.
Yeah, it's different. This kind of thing is very different than putting together, say, a video game. And many folks out there that are doing virtual work are more experienced with it being a game than being an educational tool. And so that's been kind of a challenge, to make it into, obviously it's supposed to be fun, but it's supposed to be an educational tool and not, some sort of video game. Nobody is getting shot here, for example. We're not practicing our shooting skills in this. And it's also going to depend a lot on whether or not we think there's a need for this. But it will depend a lot on whether or not it sells, because if this one sells, then we would certainly go ahead and try to create more. And there may be a more advanced version. So in other words, in a next version or a future edition, we may try to tackle maybe more than one scene, potentially a murder or an attempted murder, where we have multiple scenes happening. And then we have a body to deal with.
Incorporate a lot more factors.
Oh yeah, I could imagine that being, again, it's the more.
It can get very complicated, but it's the reality of it all. That if the student or the interested person that gets into this field, they're going to be exposed to quite a few different things, and it may be very condensed or maybe very wide and broad when it comes to the tools that they might apply. So we have to take a lot into consideration when building the next, hopefully the next project.
And I have to say, most importantly here, we want it to be cost effective. We don't want it to be so expensive to create these things that the faculty who need it the most can't afford it. And that's really key, is that we made something, I don't want to use the word basic because basic sounds bad, but we made something, kind of that anyone can utilize, regardless of how they're trying to use it, whether it's an academy or whether it's a club or whether it's an instructor teaching a class, because we want to make sure that it remains affordable for folks.
Brendan would like to know if it's possible to purchase the simulation separately from the text.
Well, at this time, that's a Kendall Hunt decision, but at this time, it is not possible. It is supposed to be used in conjunction with the textbook that was written by the 3 of us. And I'll tell you, Brendan, why it's that way. The textbook is one of the first books out there that is from the viewpoint of the crime scene investigator, instead of being from the viewpoint of the laboratory. So most CSI or forensic books that have been out there were written by folks who weren't actual crime scene investigators. They were either directors of the lab or they worked in the laboratory. And so they were giving students, and the textbook view was from one of an ideal situation. You know, ideally, this is how a CSI would package. Ideally, this is what a CSI would do at a scene. And we decided that we wanted to write the book from the perspective of the crime scene investigator, how it really goes down, so to speak. And so that's why we decided to make the book of that viewpoint, of a less formal viewpoint, and also to put the virtual scene together with the chapters of that book. So in other words, after reading chapter 1 of our book, the students should be able to go in and perform chapter 1 of this virtual component.
They could also use the book for other chapters in the book that are not a complete version inside a module inside this virtual component, and to help fill in the gaps of what they might not understand. To look into the shoe print chapter, to look into the impressions evidence chapter, look at the trace evidence, or look at a little deeper into any of the other chapters, just to get a general understanding or improve their understanding of what's in the virtual component.
Right.
The other thing I'd point out is another thing that's a little different about this book that Susan sort of touched on is Susan, Leggie, and myself have all been responsible over the years for teaching many crime scene investigators that are new to the field coming into it. And so many of the books that are written out there are written from more of a formal professorial kind of tone, as opposed to the way training is really conducted, which is, you know, on a much more informal, direct level. And this book was really written more from the perspective of an experienced crime scene investigator teaching somebody who's new to the field and coming in like real day-to-day language with real day-to-day scenarios that are not so from a more realistic perspective, I think, rather than coming at it from the professorial perspective, which isn't always. I'm not suggesting that's a bad thing per se, but in some circumstances, I think it's better just to get down and demonstrate how things truly are out there in the field.
Yeah, I think we wanted to be as realistic as we could with both the virtual component and with the book. Instead of, you know, having the ideal scenario to talk about, well, what happens when it's not ideal, you know, when it's raining on the scene or it's snowing on the scene, or you have a real curmudgeon witness who, you know, has to be somewhere and doesn't really want to help you, or you have a semi-hysterical bank teller who can't tell you much of anything. You know, those are more realistic versions of what we have come to expect from a crime scene. And Dana, to answer your question, absolutely, there is instructor stuff, and it's I believe it's in 2 formats. You know what, Megan, this is your job, but I believe it's in 2 formats. You can get an electronic copy, or you can get a hard copy.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's correct. Dana was questioning if we could, you know, provide an instructor copy for evaluation, and absolutely we can. At the end of the webinar, you will be directed to a screen where you can request a copy for free to evaluate, and then we can also send out information for the demo account so you can take a look at those simulations as well. Jumping back to how great a resource this is, just from a practitioner's perspective, correct me if I'm wrong, but this is also one of the rare CSI books out there right now that's written from people who have such a broad, the word curmudgeon, yes. This is one of the few books out there that is written from people who have got such a broad experience in the field. Am I correct?
We think so.
Yeah, I think most, like Susan touched on, I mean, there have been some books written by crime scene investigators, but they're very few and far between. And again, they're written in a much more formal tone. I think the number of years of experience that we bring to the table on this, I forget the total number of years. We're probably somewhere around 40 years of experience between the three of us.
Maybe
And
even
that's
closer
just
to
in
50.
closer
Yeah.
to 50. Okay. And that's just
Yeah.
in crime scene investigation alone. That's not counting like other work within a laboratory setting. So yeah, I think it's just a really different perspective as opposed to the bench scientist. I mean, there's been a lot of professors slash lab directors that have had a wonderful laboratory experience, but not so much when it comes to the crime scene. And as Susan touched on, it's one thing to say what the ideal crime scene looks like, but when you're showing up at 3 o'clock in the morning, it's 5 degrees outside, and it's about to start snowing, and you've got blood on the ground that you may need to sample, as well as cartridge casings and other evidence, and you're time crunched because you're now seeing the snow starting to fly. That's not something you're going to get in a typical book.
Yeah.
On top
And
of
I
doing
think,
it by yourself.
well, and I
That's
think it's very important to note that that's why all three of us are now writing books instead of actually out there at 5 degrees. Yeah, we're not, none of us are, well, I guess Dave is still working in a police department. Well, both Dave and Leggie are working in police departments, but they're working in the lab now as compared to on the scene. But I'd also want to point out, it's not just the years on. I think where we worked means a little something. We all worked in Baltimore. Dave in the county and Leggie and I in the city. And Baltimore is probably one of the most violent cities in the country. So, 5 years in Baltimore is like 20 years in, other places. Sadly, I'm not trying to brag. I think it's more about we saw quite a lot. We also, all three of us, worked in a suburban area after working in the city. We moved to the suburbs where we were able to spend a little bit more time on crime scenes. So we've seen it from the perspective of go from scene to scene to scene with very little money and very little in the way of equipment.
Advanced equipment, yeah.
Oh, good Lord, yeah. And then we've also seen it from the perspective of a suburb where we spend far more time and money on a homicide because there are less of them available or less of them occurring. So I think it's important to bring that up. Tracy, you're in Baltimore. Power to you.
All world.
Yes, tell them always say hello.
Oh God, yeah.
And to buy the book.
Are you with the city or the county, Tracy? BPD, that city? Yep. Okay.
Alva University in the area, very nice.
Okay, great. Would that happen to be Towson by chance? Oh wait, yeah, oh, Stevenson. Okay, yep, that used to be Village Uli, right? And they've had a forensic program for quite a while. Yeah, great, welcome. I believe the guy who runs Towson used to work with us, Leggie, in the city, Mark Bafili.
Yes,
it is a small world in CSI world.
They're
So.
looking for a forensic chemist now.
So.
But yeah, I think it's a good introduction to the crime scene, having this virtual walkthrough and step through and be able to pace yourself to get to know different facets of the scene. But also would help the instructors out for, like what Susan mentioned earlier, the preparation factor in creating or recreating a crime scene in your classroom or in a designated area gets to be financially taxing and physically taxing, especially when you have multiple units of your class. If you have multiple classes and sessions of groups of students, that gets a little hectic. And I think this would be a beneficial tool for those instructors.
Well, and Tracy, I'm reading your chat here. You're the perfect person to give us some feedback positive or negative. We would appreciate it. And that is because we know that a lot of these universities, particularly post-COVID, students are clamoring for more online courses and online programs. And crime scene investigation and forensics in general is so difficult to try to fathom teaching online, 100% online, without a laboratory or with take-home labs or with virtual labs. And so unfortunately, this is going to be their lab. This virtual type of stuff is going to be their lab. And so we are still, we're hoping that it's a good substitute. And you're the kind of person who could tell us whether or not we've, nailed it, so to speak. So we'd love to have your feedback if you use the product in the book.
Excellent. All right, are there any other questions today about the presentation, the simulations, or the publication itself? Right? Doesn't look like it. Well, Susan, Leggie, and David, thank you so much for presenting with us today. We appreciate your time, your expertise, the tremendous amount of work that, and just thoughtfulness that that went into the creation of a virtual crime scene. It's a much needed resource today. So we really appreciate you walking through with us. And to everyone who attended today, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate your time as well. In the coming days, you guys will be sent a recording of this presentation, as well as a link in which you can request a free exam copy if you would like to look at that, as well as a free demo account so that you can get a sneak peek at some of those simulations. But until then, everyone have a wonderful day and enjoy.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you so much. We need your feedback so we can make this better the next time around. And so we appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.
Bye, everyone.